A bag of popcorn.
Yeah. Right, ladies and gentlemen. Gary. Yes. You can hear me. And the rest of it. Yes. Marion has been invited back to do a reading after everybody went to bed last time. Sorry about that, dear.
I apologise for breakfast the following morning.
Yes, yes, we'd like to apologise. I need recompense. Come back and do some reading.
You'll have to keep quiet if you want to hear. This is an old story. This is, I think, the second story I have published, but it's a good reader. It's called The Seal Songs. Ewan could hear his father calling him in, but he was listening to the singing, and his father always left him alone when he was listening to the singing. At first, he had used to hit him, but now he left him alone. Ewan sometimes wondered why. The singing came out of a low green hill, and the voices were very high and clear and sweet, unlike his father's voice, which was loud and unmusical, and harsh by anger and tiredness. Presently the calling stopped, and Ewan guessed that his father had seen him and gone away, and soon he would go into the village to get drunk. When Callum McNeill had finished the mainland education his father had worked so hard to give him, he had returned to the island, intending only to say goodbye to his father and visit his mother's grave before taking his law degree to London. But his father was ill, and Callum had stayed. His father had died, and the lonely green island, and the great green and blue and white Atlantic, and the lovely Fiona Mahia had all put their spell on Callum, and he had stayed to marry Fiona and work his father's croft. But Fiona's beauty had been of a delicate kind. She had not lived to see her fair boy baby grow. So here was Callum McNeill at 32, breaking his back to make a bare living, with no law practice and no wife, a patch of black earth and a handful of livestock, and a son he was afraid of. For Ewan had inherited his mother's ear, the gift of Ewan McKeon, his ancestor and namesake, and Ewan listened to things his father could not hear, and his father was afraid. When the singing stopped, Ewan went home and put himself to bed. He slept too soundly to wake when his father came in. In the morning, his father said, "You didn't come in last night when I called you, Ewan." "No, father." "You were listening to that damn devil music you pretend to hear, weren't you, boy?" Ewan went on with his work and made no reply. His father shouted louder, "You're as bad as the old woman, mad like her." "Which old woman is that, father?" "You know damn fine. Old madish Belle McLean, your mother's cousin, that sings to the seals. You're mad, your mother was mad, God rest her. All of us on these islands are mad. Then the go of the right of it. I should never have come back." And he flung out like a storm gale. Ewan finished the housework quickly, went out, saw his father with his back to him, and slipped silently away, making for the other side of the island, the croft of Ishbel McLean. He had not known the old woman sang to seals. He was interested. Twice, when his father was not about, Ewan had heard the seals sing. He had tried to remember their songs, which were deeper, more melodious, more human in their feeling than the heart-aching, otherworldly songs that came from the green mounds. He could only recall snatches and fragments. Ewan liked to sing, but when he sang, his father hit him. So he sang the songs he heard from the hills only when he was alone. He learned other songs in English during term time at the tiny island school, but he never sang them on his own, and his father never heard them. The songs in the hills, and those the seals sang, were in the language that Ewan had learnt from his grandmother, who had looked after him when he was small, and from a few old people on the island. The school teacher and Ewan's father both made him speak English. But now was the long summer holiday, when Ewan's every chance sought out the emptiest parts of the empty island, walked and sang and dreamed. On the wide, white western shore, the sand squeaked underfoot like birds chirping. When there was a steady wind, which was almost always, the grains of sand sang as they tumbled over each other. Sometimes Ewan fancied the singing of the sand was sound in the world. But he preferred the loneliness of the endless beach and the endless sky and the sea that rolled unbroken to America, to the loneliness of the dark house with his father's eyes on him, and even that to the hideous isolation of the school, where the teacher waited to pounce and call him wicked and stupid and impertinent, and to make mirthless fun of him. And the other children waited to laugh and jeer and taunt him. Ewan felt he would not have minded so much if he could have discovered a reason for these things, but he could not. They kept a mouse in a cage in the classroom, and one day, Ewan's mind wandering a moment from the lesson, he had seen the cage open and the mouse gone. He had said, "Please, miss," but before he had got any further, "Ewan McNeill, you will not interrupt when I am speaking. I realise that your own knowledge is so extensive that you have nothing to learn from anything I may say, but you must remember that not everyone has the benefit," and so on, until a girl screamed and giggled as she saw the mouse running across the floor, and a red-headed boy called Angus had caught the mouse and locked it up again. And the teacher had told everyone to calm down and thanked Angus and said how clever and helpful he was, and glared at Ewan as if he had let the mouse out in the first place. It did not make any sense to Ewan. But here on the glittering sand, where the islanders had once used to dig for cockles, it didn't seem to matter very much. He was not alone. The island wore a circlet of gulls about its head, screaming against the wind. And out at sea, whiskered heads of seals bobbed like so many old men bathing. Once, Ewan stood so still, so long, that one of the seals had come out of the sea and wobbled up the beach to touch his leg with its nose. Ewan stroked its shiny wet head and knelt down, and they had looked each other in the eyes for half a minute before the seal turned and bounced back down into the water. After that, Ewan had not felt so lonely. Once he dreamed that his mother was a seal. Ewan sang now, tramping across the island, the familiar wind whipping the air into his eyes. He crossed the glen where men and women were cutting and drying and carting away the jet black peats. Most of them tossed him a greeting, and Ewan would murmur something. And when he had passed, they turned to each other and shook their heads. But Ewan walked on, and scrambled nimbly, with the easy assurance of long custom, up the steep rocky side of the hill, and wandered unhurried down the long, gentler slope of the other side, where the little black milch cows grazed. And the wind smacked at the sea as he came to the rocky blue loch, beside which huddled the low stone cottage of Ishbel McLean. Ishbel McLean was very, very old. Her face was pale, her skin like crumpled paper that had been smoothed out, seeming too big for her bones. Her eyes were very distant, as if her soul were barely in her body any longer. She was long widowed, her children all dead or gone away, all but one of her grandchildren gone to sea, or flown like wild geese to America. The old woman hardly moved now from the seat where Ewan found her, blinking his sunlit eyes against the sudden inside darkness. The old woman did not move. She heard him enter and called out in a thin voice like wind in the long grass. "Who is there?" "Ewan, son of Callum McNeill," said Ewan. "I will be learning something from you, Mrs. McLean." "Come in and welcome, Ewan McCallum McNeill," she said. "I am old and I don't see you well and I cannot stand. But go over to the table, there is milk and cake for a guest." Ewan thanked her and accepted the refreshment and said, "My father says that you sing to the seals. I've heard the seals sing, but I can't remember what I hear. I should be glad if you would teach me some of their songs." Her eyes brightened. She smiled a little. "So, you hear them? And some say the seals do not sing and it is all fancy. Sit, child, sit down." Ewan picked up a low stool and set it on the sanded floor at the old woman's feet. "I hear a lot of singing," he said. "It's very beautiful, but my father doesn't like it." "Whom do you hear singing?" she asked. Ewan finished the cake and licked his fingers. "I hear people singing in the knolls. I don't know who they are, because if I ask my father, he hits me. And if I mention the school, he gets angry and the other children laugh. Anyway, my granny always said I shouldn't ask. I think I should like to be a seal," he went on forth. "They're beautiful, gentle looking, so silky like flying, never to be beaten and never to have to go to school. And they like fish. The old woman was thoughtful. She said, "You and I haven't much to do in the world now, and I remember best things that happened long ago. And is not your mother a McKeon?" "She was Fiona McKeon. She died when I was a baby." "Why?" Ishbel McLean smiled and nodded. "Then you too have the gift. For I was a McKeon before I married. And your name is Ewan. Then certainly I must teach you the seal songs." "But first, please," said Ewan, "who is it that sings in the hills? And what is the gift? And why doesn't my father like it? I've heard him saying, 'Damn old McKeon and his gift.' But he doesn't say what he means by it." So Ishbel McLean told him how the fair folk, the Dinashee, lived in the green mounds and the hollow hills, and often their singing can be heard by those with ears to listen. And she told how Ewan's distant ancestor, Ewan McKeon, had come one day upon a woman from the mound and had listened to her singing until she saw him. And when she saw him, she was angry that he had watched her unseen. But McKeon praised her singing with many fine words, and what was more important, meaning every one of them, for she was not one to be impressed by long words. And he pleased her, and instead of cursing him, she gave him 3 gifts, that he and all his children would always have the friendship and goodwill of the fair folk, and always be able to hear their singing and have the singing voice. And some say also that Ewan McKeon's wife was a seal woman, but I don't know the rights of that. Ewan said, "I don't understand," the old woman sighed. "As no one knows the old tales now, well, some will say that the seal folk can come ashore at will and shed their seal skins and take the shape of human men and women. But if they return to the sea, they must be seals again forever. But on another island, they say that they are the sons of a king under an enchantment and can only return to their human forms at night. My grandfather said they were the souls of those lost at sea, and that is why you must be good to them, because they might be your friends and kinsfolk. But my mother used to say, and she was a McCodrum, and they are related to the seals, you know, she said that the seal people are first cousins to the people of the mounds. As to your father, I expect he cannot hear the singing, and that's putting the fear on him, for many people are afraid of what they do not know." "That sounds rather silly," said Ewan, "but it's hard on him not to hear it. Now teach him the seal songs, please." So she taught him the seal songs, full of the deep sea and the ocean swell, the beauty that was less and more than human. Many other songs she had learned from the fair folk. And Ewan sang the songs he had heard. By the time Ewan left the old woman, still singing, to go home, it was coming on dark. Callum had walked out his rage and thought miserably, "Is he mad? Should he be put away? Or see a psychiatrist? Out here? Ridiculous." He remembered an old man who lived on the island when he, Callum, was a boy. Crazy Ian. Poor Crazy Ian, to the women. He had been pitied and tolerated, and he had terrified Callum. Callum's childhood seemed to have been compounded of fears. Fear of his father's austere anger, and now and then a beating carried out with a horrible calm. Fear of his mother's tears. Fear of poor Crazy Ian, his awkward gait, vacant eyes, distorted hollow voice. Fear of the countless faceless powers that thronged the earth and air and sea. But in his expensive school and university, Callum had come to feel secretly superior to his parents, and so, for the first time, to love them a little, to regard Crazy Ian as an unfortunate product of inbreeding, and to dismiss the fairies and phantoms as fancy and superstition. So it never occurred to him now to think that Ewan singers might exist, but he was afraid of them just the same. Callum reminded himself there was work to be done, and slowly turned back. The flowered island laid out all around him, the beauty that had seduced his youth. But Callum was disillusioned with beauty. Damned wind, he thought, wind and rain and damned hard work, why the hell do I stay? He could not remember the day Fiona died, but he had got drunk for the first time in his life and stayed drunk for a week. When he was finally sober, he was drained of all will and desire, of everything but pain. And they said he must see to his land and care for his son. He obeyed. And Fiona's mother looked after the baby, while Callum drowned his grief in work until the day was gone, and then drowned it in whiskey. And one day he woke up and found that the pain was gone, and so was half he knew of law, and he couldn't care for the books that lay dusty on shelves. And he found a son he knew nothing about, and listened to inaudible voices. He thought of leaving the boy, fleeing back to the mainland. But Fiona seemed to sing in the wind and smile in Ewan's face. Callum couldn't leave. But now Fiona's face was masked by the face of crazy Ian. And as Callum tried not to hate his son, a voice whispered, "You killed her, you killed her." And another replied, "No, the boy. He killed her, the boy." When Ewan reached home, it was late, and his father was home, drunk, and he cursed Ewan and beat him for staying away all day. But Ewan did not really pay very much attention, for his head was full of songs. The next day was Sunday, and on Sundays Callum McNeill never got drunk until he and Ewan, washed and brushed and in their good clothes, had been to Mass. After a bad Saturday night, Callum was apt to fancy that the prayers sounded blasphemous on Ewan's lips, or even that the words in the boy's mouth were turning subtly into fairy songs to entice all the souls of the congregation down to hell. This Sunday, after the service, Callum stopped to talk to one or two neighbours. When he turned back, Ewan was not there. Someone said she had seen the boy go down towards the beach, so Callum McNeill went that way. He came down the dunes to the long stretch of white shore, where the gulls cried lonely overhead. And he saw his son Ewan lying flat on his face, in his good clothes, on the wet white sand. And in a clear, high voice, Ewan was singing, in the Gaelic, a song that set up shivers down Callum McNeill's spine and all over his body. Callum had always insisted that the boy speak English, but in any case he could not listen to the words for that haunting, beautiful, terrible tune. He prayed to God that he generally ignored to make it stop. A little way out in the glittering water ran a line of skerries, rocks that stand out from the sea and are covered at high tide. The tide was low now, and on the skerries 3 great grey seals were sunning themselves. Callum was not afraid of the seals, for he thought of them only as animals. He had never heard them sing. He looked at them, smooth and shining and sleek, with their great soft eyes and sad, intelligent faces turned landward. And gradually it dawned on him that Ewan was singing to the seals, and that the seals were listening. And just as he realised that, Ewan stopped singing in the middle of a phrase, and the nearest seal rose on its front flippers, lifted its nose, and to Callum's intense horror, took up the song where Ewan had left off. It was too much. For a moment, Callum McNeill went purely mad with fear. He gave a terrible scream, at which the 3 seals split the water and vanished. Then he bent and picked up Ewan by his collar and waistband, and lifted him, and swung him, and hurled him out to sea. And then, truly, madness came on Callum McNeill, for what he seized and flung from him was a small boy. And what flew through the air silently, without a single cry, and curved down towards the Atlantic's blue surface, was a small boy. But what struck the water and slipped noiselessly under the wave was a small grey seal.